So my name is Adrian Reed. A very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. I'm really pleased to be joined by Caroline Beasley today to be talking about the importance of target operating models. Now, you might be joining, perhaps you're a business analyst, interested in business architecture. Maybe you're wondering whether this is business analysis or business architecture, and maybe you're doing bits of both, like many senior BAs do. Either way, this is going to be a topic that you're going to be really interested in. So Caroline is a consultant senior business analyst at Holly Holland and is enthusiastic and a collaborative change professional with 2 decades of business analysis transformation and change experience under her belt. But I'm going to hand straight over to Caroline. So with a presentation entitled Implementing Business Success, the Importance of Target Operating Models. Caroline, over to you.
Right, yeah, thank you very much for the intro, Adrian. It's great to be here, and thank you obviously for inviting me along. This presentation is one that I presented back in September at the Business Analysis conference, and it was something really kind of pulling together a lot of experiences, I suppose, I had gathered over the course of my career. Just a little bit about myself, really. So as Adrian said, I've been a BA for around 20 years, working at different levels, different sort of organisations, different industries, and across a lot of different domain areas as well. So I've worked as a BA in some very sort of traditional roles in terms of problem analysis, writing requirements, sort of supporting testing through to the end of delivery. But I've also stepped in to some sort of other capacities, sort of supporting more business change related activities. So business readiness, user adoption, sort of post-delivery. And I've also worked with operating models as well. And that's really why I kind of pulled this presentation together to sort of share, really, because I wanted to share what I've learned, share those experiences and help kind of pass that forward. So just in summary, quickly, sort of those different experiences around target operating models and operating models in general. I just want to kind of run through where those experiences have kind of fallen, I guess, within my career. So I started out my business analysis career working for Thames Water. And around 10 years ago, we were looking to have a view of our IT function. Essentially, we had a new CIO who came into role and really wanted to put their shape onto the function, looking at the capabilities internally. And an operating model piece of work kind of came out the back end of that. And as a BA working in that team, I was asked to come along and support sort of understanding what the processes were going to be in terms of how we wanted to move that forward, how the different capabilities within the IT function would work together. And then I also started to look at roles and responsibilities, and we implemented a skills framework. So that really ensured that we had real clarity around the roles within the IT function, but also alignment across the whole of the function. So that was my first sort of hands-on introduction and involvement in operating model work, and very much organisationally driven. Then I moved forward a few years, probably around 4 or 5 years later, and I joined Aldermore Bank again as a senior business analyst. And the first piece of work, the first project I got assigned to, was to look at implementing a new API middleware platform. So on face value, it was a very sort of technical project, technical implementation. I was really lucky to be involved in that right from the very outset. So as a BA, I wanted to go in and understand really what's the problem we were trying to fix here, kind of get that problem analysis under my belt to really understand what we were trying to address here. So on face value, it looked very technical, but from those early interviews and starting to collate that information and those different perspectives from the business, it became clear that actually implementing some new technology and replacing existing technology wasn't really going to solve the problem. That actually some of those problems were more fundamental, fundamentally to do with the operating model or lack of operating model. And so that was really another opportunity for me to sort of step in and start to build out my experience with operating models. And then again, sort of fast forwarding another few years, I joined Holly Holland Consultancy a couple of years ago. And the first client that I joined were a global bank. We were looking to introduce a new data lineage capability. So quite a specific kind of area, I suppose, of the of the organisation. And part of what we were looking at was to start to draft out an operating model blueprint to support that technology change. So again, that has had quite a large sort of technology focus, but the operating model was sort of the wraparound to really ensure that the success of that was really embedded, essentially. I'm actually going to use that most recent experience with Holly Holland later on in my presentation as a use case to kind of really bring to life the approach that I took and how we kind of moved that forward. So in a nutshell, there's just different instances along the course of my career, and it's really helped me sort of build out a bit of an approach, and that's kind of how I want to move forward. So from this session, I would like to be really clear about what I hope everyone will take away from this. So first of all, what I really want to do is sort of make sure that everybody has a kind of an understanding of what an operating model is. It might be something that's quite not a new concept, but something you've not really been involved with before. So let's have a look at, what an operating model is, what it might look like, but also kind of what are those different component parts of an operating model. Then moving on, I want to kind of give you a sense of, well, why do you need an operating model? What value does it bring? Why would you put the time and effort into doing that? And hopefully that will come across in this presentation as well. And then sort of lastly, I am a BA, and what I really wanted to do was kind of help as BAs understand how we can use our sort of BA toolkit, all our skills, to really help with these types of kind of pieces of work. They're not the necessarily traditional BA types of activities that we undertake, but actually we've got loads of really great skills that really lend themselves very well to this. But I'm very much I want something practical out of workshops and webinars. So hopefully I'll be able to give you something a bit practical to take away as well. So moving on, I just wanted to sort of start a very sort of high level really, and sort of introduce change. So what do we mean by change? So change essentially is, moving from a current state where we are now into a future state where we want to be in the future. And part of delivering change, we go through this sort of stage where we're designing what that change needs to look like. And we call that sort of the desired, we then sort of start to sketch out the desired future state. Once we've sketched that out, and we understand where we want to get to, well, then we deliver it, we implement it. That might mean, creating artifacts and undertaking activities and training. But essentially, all change is triggered. There's always a trigger for change. Now, that could be we're working in a regulated organisation. There's a new regulation that we need to adhere to, and that is our trigger for change to remain compliant. It could be that our organisation has a new business strategy. We need to change the way our business operates and how it functions in response to be able to meet our targets and our goals against that strategy. And it could be that there's something in our existing business that just isn't working very well. It's not working as optimally as it could be. It might be broken. And so we'll kind of go through that change process to fix that. So that trigger for change can be really, really varied. But ultimately, we wouldn't take on all that work to move from where we are now to design that future state and to implement that unless there was some business benefit. So, it's sort of, it's always, good to keep our eye on what the ultimate benefit of any change is. So kind of moving on from there, when we go through that change process, right, there may be many implications. We've all been through change ourselves. We've all worked in organisations. We've been on the sort of tail end of that. So in terms of what those implications for change may be, quite often we've been through, a reorganisation. Okay. Part of that change means that we are structured in our team differently. We've got different roles. The team needs to be structured differently. And ultimately, well, inevitably, will be new ways of working, right? So there may be new processes that we need to follow and adhere to as part of helping support that change and moving forward. If you're bringing in a new capability, you'll have new processes that will come into play. Another implication of change is actually we may require some new skills. So, and I've seen this before, we've introduced a new system, a new application, and there are different skills that are required to kind of maintain and use that application. And also I've seen on the flip side, I've seen the need to retire skills as well. We've moved from the old world to the new world. Actually, the skills that we had within our team previously actually might not be relevant anymore. They need to be kind of superseded with new skills. So there's definitely that very kind of people-focused aspect of the implication of change. And tied in with the people side of things, you've got the cultural change. This is always inevitably seems to be the hardest one. So in our organization, we have a strategy to move from A to B. The goal is often that there'll be some sort of cultural shift as well. And that's really hard. That's really hard to put in place because it sort of has to be a little bit homegrown, really. It's definitely one of the more challenging ones out of, the different implications. The next one is a little bit more technical, I suppose. So we've implemented some new technology that supports our change. Actually, we need to consider how we can support that technology, the health of that technology. We don't want to pay all that money to implement it for immediately from day one. It starts to degrade and you lose the value from that investment. So thinking about those new support agreements, those new maintenance agreements is really important to ensure that you kind of maintain, you've got that, you're future proofing essentially. And then the last sort of implication is that you might need to, there may be some sort of new governance and control measures that you need to think about. So for example, I'm introducing a new product into my organization that's part of my wider operating model. Well, actually, we might need to make decisions around that product in terms of how that product evolves over time. How does that product evolve so it remains current and of value to that organization? So as you can see, there's sort of many facets, I guess, of how the change sort of impacts the business. And it's great because there's so much in there, and there's so many different ways that you can get involved with change and different hats to kind of wear. It certainly makes it very interesting. So moving on from there, I've talked about change and the implications of that. So what's this got to do with target operating models and operating models? So first of all, I wanted to introduce some definitions around operating models, just so that everybody's got a kind of a clear view of really what we're talking about when we say operating model. So one definition that I've come across is that an operating model is, it's a visual representation of how a business delivers value and how it runs itself. I really like that definition. You've got the visual aspects. It's a model. It's visual. You can see kind of how your organization ties together. The other definition that I've come across that I also quite like, it sort of extends it out a little bit further, is that it addresses how your organization structures itself in terms of the people and those functions and the activities and the infrastructure in terms of technology and the data, so that it can deliver against its business strategy. And then the third one that I've come across here just brings in something slightly different again. So it represents how those components, kind of business components, fit together, but in line with the system's guiding principles. And by system, that could be technical system, but it could be business system. But for me, that could be around having best practice guidelines in place. And then these would be outlined as part of your operating model work. So these are sort of three definitions that I think kind of come together. And essentially, it's about the people in terms about the skills, the structure, the culture, all of those aspects there. You've then got the functions and capabilities. That's how all of your organizational capabilities hang together. How do they all interact with each other? So going back to my example where we were restructuring a CIO function, it's around how does the service delivery team interact with the change team, etc. You've then got your processes, and your processes are kind of underlying, make your business tick and operate, and they give guidance. So within the organization, we know what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then infrastructure, as I sort of alluded to, is not only just the technical infrastructure, but it's data, it's those sort of enablers essentially within your business. I wanted to just touch on the definition of or target operating model. So again, I think we've probably all been in situations where people have talked about a target operating model, might also be referred to as a TOM, but also in the context of an operating model. So I just wanted to kind of give a bit of clarity really around that. So essentially a target operating model is a description of that desired state, where that organization wants to go. And if we go back to that very simple diagram around we're in this current state, we want to move to this future state, but we need to do some design in the middle. We can then say, kind of start to overlay, well, how does the target operating model overlay on that? So we're currently have a mode of operation. That's our current operating model. When we go through that process of designing what we want that future state, that target state to look, that's our target operating model. And then we take that target state, that target operating model, and we will then implement that. And then we're in that new mode of operation. So I just wanted to kind of set some clarity around what these different terms mean. We do tend to use them quite interchangeably, rightly or wrongly. And I think also when we hear the word TOM, quite often that brings up connotations of a new structure diagram and you're part of a reorganization. But actually, it's so much more than that and can be so much more than that. So why are operating models important? You know, it's potentially quite a lot of work to go through that process of designing what that future state looks like. And there's a number of reasons why there's real value from putting that effort into that design and implementation stages. So first of all, if we've designed our operating model, we've designed the target state, and we've articulated what that new world looks like, the mode of operation, we've articulated those new processes, or the refined processes, the change processes from where we are at the moment. So by having those processes defined, well, it means that we're operating efficiently. We understand what it is that we need to do. We've got some reference point, and everyone's on the same page. And that ensures that your business is really operating as efficiently as it can do. And then by having all of those processes in place, and everybody having a really clear view of their purpose and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and articulating, all of those different aspects, we're also ensuring that our business is operating in a sustainable way. The target operating model says this is how we want to operate. By implementing that, we're thinking about how we can future-proof our mode of operation. That's baked into your operating model. So that element of operating sustainably and future-proof are very much kind of go hand in hand. And if we think about the trigger for change, so our trigger for change has been off the back of regulatory requirements, say. We've gone through the process of articulating what that operating model is. Well, actually, we're following that, we're adhering to that, and in turn, we should remain compliant. We get our regulatory compliance. But actually, compliance isn't just about external compliance, it could be internal compliance as well. We're following the ways that we envisaged we would work, and we're adhering to that, and therefore we're compliant internally as well. And actually, as an employee, I'm in this new world, this new way of working. I understand how I'm supposed to work. Actually, from my personal point of view, I understand when I come into work what I'm doing day to day, and that makes me as an employee, feel great. I understand what I'm doing. There's no ambiguity in the way that I'm working. And actually, if I'm as an employee are kind of happy, then the likelihood is that my customers are going to get great service and they're going to be happy as well. And I guess ultimately all of that leads to the ability to increase business performance, which ultimately may lead to increased sales. So there's lots of different benefits from putting that effort into defining the operating model. So moving forward, I just want to kind of go through a bit of an approach to how we can design an operating model. As BAs, we have a whole toolkit of different tools and techniques that we can use. And there's a couple here that I've kind of pulled out that I think lend themselves to this type of work really, really well. The first one that I'm going to share with you is the operating model canvas. It's got an acronym of POLISM. And this is a really nice model in that it starts to kind of call out from my business, what are my suppliers? Who am I dependent on to operate my business? It thinks about the locations. So that's the location of where my offices are, the location of my clients, my customers. We've got the value proposition here. That's our P in our POLISM. This is really around sort of what are those processes that deliver value to my business. Organization around people, structure, process, people and structure, culture as well kind of ties into that organization kind of element there. And information's around technology, data, and then the other kind of layer we've got on here is around management systems. So what is, for me, this is sort of around that governance and control layer. It's like, what governance do I need to have in place to operate my business in a compliant and effective way? And if you take that model on the right-hand side, you can see there's like a marked up version of this. And you can see how you can use this really, really nicely in a workshop. You can use this model, firstly, to start to map out what is your, what's your current state? What does your business currently do? So if you're looking, this example here, is for a consultancy organization. So for example, if we look at, our processes and our value proposition, it's around, winning business and delivering work to clients. In terms of the location, it's around, well, I want to be located near my customers, and I want to be able to locate it where I can, have a workforce that can work for me. So this is a really nice model, and I say you can use it for that kind of current state, but then you can take that current state and start to think about, well, actually, when we're designing that target, which elements of this do we think we want to change, or we need to change? Are there any kind of new elements that we need to add in there? Are there some that we need to remove because they're going to be redundant? Really nice model. The next model is one that I'm sure anyone who is a BA will know this one very well. I came across this many, many years ago when I first sort of did my training as a business analyst. It's the POPIT model. It's a really nice one. It's very memorable. POPIT, it's your people, your organization, your processes, your information and technology. So it's largely the same as the previous model. The element that's not really captured in here is obviously the management piece. So that's sort of supplementary to that, but as a memorable model, this is always there at the back of my mind, and one that I've used in many, many instances over the course of my career. So I'm very visual. That's how I kind of work, which is why I like all these lovely diagrams. What I always think is quite nice to sort of share is a bit of what could a target operating model look like? And for me, it's kind of going back to those sort of definitions. We've got, it's visual, it explains how business runs itself, and it calls out those sort of people, functions, and the infrastructure. So here are two examples. And what I will say is that there is no hard, fast rule as to how you document a target operating model or your operating model. It very much depends on the remit of the piece, the operating model work that you're doing. So operating model work can be from organizational wide, right? We're going to restructure our whole organization. Got a whole new business strategy that we need to implement. Or it could be as little as we've got a new sort of tool that we're bringing into the organization, a new system, but actually want an operating model that wraps around that to make sure that we are getting the best value possible out of that investment into that tool. So it varies very much on the context of the work that you're delivering and you're designing. But the one on the left is one that I used. I came across this when I was doing my operating model work at Aldermore, the API middleware platform. And I wanted to I was thinking, it started off with essentially the blank piece of paper, and it was like, Caroline, go and design a target operating model. I was like, what is that going to look like? I came across this, and for me, it just kind of called out everything that I, wanted to kind of try and incorporate. So you can see in there, it sort of captures those, what I call operating model components from your processes and your technology. And then you can see essentially on a one page, you've got, it refers to how your people management and your processes and your technology. Really nice and high level. And I really liked that because it really brought it to life. The example on the right-hand side, again, it just calls out those operating model component areas from skills, technology, organization and governance. And then under there, you can start to articulate a really high level. What are those elements that we're going to incorporate and think about as part of our target operating model? I've also seen more than presented an target operating model more as a capability model. So you've got capabilities within an area of your business and how they kind of are grouped together and how they interact with each other. So it can be really varied, but these are just two examples that I just thought, you can kind of take away and have in your mind. So moving forwards, I've been through this type of work, a few times, and essentially I've sort of tried to build out a little bit of an approach, or what I call, a bit of a roadmap for this. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll try not to dwell on this too much, but essentially this roadmap starts me from my blank piece of paper at the very beginning of starting this piece of work through to implementing my operating model, and then it kind of living and breathing beyond the project, kind of going live, or the people that are working on that kind of moving on. So at the very outset, understanding the current state is so important. It's how can you design where you want to go if you don't understand where you are now? This is classic kind of BA territory, right? Understand the current state. That operating model canvas can be a great sort of tool to use at this stage of your piece of work. And then what I'd start to do, once I understand where I am now, we'll start to map out what we think the target state would look like. And for me, the approach I've used is really sort of starting at a high level and capturing what I call a TOM blueprint. It's sketching out what are those key component areas of my op model that I want to consider as part of this piece of work. So I've called that a TOM blueprint to level 1, very high level. So I'm starting to think about what that might look like, okay, what those component areas. And then from there, I will start to socialize my thinking. So I'll have a sponsor, no doubt. So in that example where I worked in the IT team at Thames Water, it was our CIO who was my sponsor there. So that's where we start to sort of socialize. And that works twofold. It's one, to ensure that I'm on the right tracks, right? I'm thinking about all the right component areas, but it also starts to socialize it and build that endorsement. And that's so important because essentially this is not my operating model, my target operating model. This belongs to the business. So the business need to really be behind it and, endorsing it. So that's so important for me. And then once I've got that endorsement, I'm like, right, brilliant. As a starter for 10, my sponsor's happy, I can move forward. And then from there, I'll start to take it out to the next level from there. And at this point, I'm starting to think about not only the component areas of my op model, be it, skills and training and best practice guidelines and whatever it might be, but I'm also thinking about what are the things that I actually need to deliver? What are the artifacts that I need to write? Or get people to write as part of delivering this operating model. So I'm starting to think about the activities in there. But also on top of that, there might be things I'm identifying that aren't necessary for the go live of this particular piece of work. So I'm trying to think also about what are my MVP, what are my minimum viable product, the things that I absolutely need to have in place on day one, and what actually can we save to a little bit later on, and we can start to build that out at a later date. So my MVP is kind of really key here. So for example, if I'm implementing a new piece of software, I really need to have a sort of access control process in place before we do that. We need to be able to onboard new users to that system. For me, that's, an MVP item. Actually, we also need to train people on that, and we need to have done communication. So for me, those are MPV items, but there might be other items that are less important, and we can sort of shift that later through our plan. So once I've gone through that more detailed level, again, getting that sponsorship endorsement, and I'm actually starting to share what I think those deliverables are going to be with my sponsor. And assuming my sponsor's happy with that, then I'm starting to think about, I'm in delivery mode, right? And it might be different in different organizations. You might have a project manager that's really driving a delivery plan. But actually, if you're the person who's really working to design out this operating model, then we're probably as good a place as any to start to think about how we might deliver that and sort of plan that out and how long that might take for those different activities. So once we've got that plan in place, we've identified our MVP items, we can then start to produce those. We can start to write those artifacts and think about how we're going to share them, how we're going to publish them with our organization, how we're going to get sign off for those. And then we're at the point of go live. So we're implementing our MVP operating model. We're live. But the journey doesn't really necessarily finish there. As I say, we've got those non-MVP items that we'll then continue to build out and we'll continue to roll out to the organisation. And we kind of continue that journey. And then really the very last piece here is around, you know, a nod really to maturing your operating model. You know, we're never going to get this right first time. There may be some things where we'd envisaged that they would work, the way we envisaged different teams would interact with each other, actually in practice just doesn't seem to work. So there's always room for to change and enhance and improve the way that works. And the other thing is, there's always that look back around, we're doing this for a reason, right? We're putting all this effort into designing an operating model, and it's because we need to achieve some sort of business benefit, right? There's a goal, there's a target that we want to meet. So actually what we should be doing is putting some measures in place, some KPIs that sort of say, well, what are our measures of success that this operating model is ticking the box, it's doing all the right things, you know, looking at maybe our user adoption rates and compliance to best practice guidelines that we might have laid out, for example. So there's that kind of look back and that monitoring our compliance to the target operating model, the operating model that we've implemented. So this gives you a bit of a sort of end-to-end view of how you can start with a blank piece of paper through to implementing it and really kind of breaking it down into stages. So moving on from there, you know, I've talked about the TOM blueprint conceptually. Actually, this is just an example of what my TOM blueprint might look like. I'm essentially just saying, what are the component model, the op model components. Okay, so, and we can just follow our POPIT model for this. It's around, you know, people and organisation, our processes, information technology, but we might want to supplement that with governance control and anything else that is valid and applicable. And in here, you know, the level 1 would be, you know, our people, our sort of org charts, skills framework, etc. The level 2 could be actually taking that down to a slightly lower level of detail, but essentially this is what's driving my plan for delivery as well. We said we need a skills framework. Okay, we need to build that out. We need to put that in place. So that's the kind of the what around our operating model. The next few slides, I'm going to sort of move through this pretty quickly because I'm just conscious of time, but essentially this is sort of an approach to defining that TOM blueprint, and really the way that I've kind of gone starting with my level 1 TOM blueprint is to first of all start with my POPIT model, to then start to think, I might brainstorm with colleagues, be them other BAs in my team, they might be other people working within the project, and start to think about what things we need to be thinking about. And then I'd always take a look back and kind of go, let's make sure whatever we're designing here does not conflict against strategy. Let's make sure it's aligned with our strategy. Let's just sort of validate that we're heading in the right direction here and we're not designing something that just goes against the grain. It's always valuable and worthwhile putting yourself in your, I call customer shoes, and that could be internal customers, it could be external customers. So for example, you know, we think about the people and the roles in there. If I'm one of those people, how would this feel to me? How, you know, is there anything missing? Is there anything that I need that hasn't necessarily been called out? So it's just a point of reflection, really. And then I've sketched out my TOM blueprint to a level 1, essentially. I'd go and get that sign off, as that kind of ties back with that roadmap piece. And then essentially I can kind of loop back round and go through the same process, really, but to my lower level of detail. So that's just an approach of how I can sort of start with my POPIT model and then start to work through my TOM blueprint. So the other thing I really wanted, when I shared this as originally, it's a business analysis conference, and what I wanted to do is sort of share how we can use other aspects of our BA toolkit to really help complement operating model work. So I'm a business analyst. I've been assigned to a project. Caroline, go and do some as-is analysis or current state analysis, problem analysis, and actually we're going to start to build out a set of requirements. Part of building out those requirements will be to get some idea of the context of what I'm looking at here. And I might pull together and document a use case. This is a business use case. Now, this is just an example that I've pulled from a well-used and loved business analysis BCS book, and it's a project management organization. So in here, the kind of use case is looking at project management. We've got 2 actors in here. We've got our project manager and our program manager, and the use case is relevant to the project manager around, you know, establishing a new project, planning a project, monitoring it, and then closing it. And then we've got our program manager who supervises overall. This is just an artifact that I've produced as part of being, you know, a BA on that project. Then if I start to think about that in the, in aligned to the Poppet model, well, actually, this aligns really nicely. If I look at my people, I've already called out in this use case, project manager and a program manager. Those are two actors that I've called out. So actually, when I'm thinking about my operating model, I need to think about, well, what are the implications for this then? So, organizationally, how do they work together? Are they going to be the project managers reporting to a program manager? Do they want to sit as part of more of a matrix structure? And you can sort of use this to kind of help validate your thinking, but also make sure you haven't got any gaps in there, essentially. If you look at the processes essentially are the use cases within this business use case diagram. That process of setting up a new project and managing that project through to completion, that's a process in essence. So this is, I quite like this because it's just a way that we can use those artifacts that we're already kind of capturing as part of being a BA on that project, and then feed that into our operating model as well. It's just extending that thought out a little bit further. So moving on, I've talked about in that roadmap around, we kind of come up conceptually with what are those op model components. We then start to build that down into more detail. We start to identify the activities, and essentially we've got a list of artifacts and activities. And if we then combine those with the kind of business change activities, things like, training your users, what communications do you need to do to inform people that this change is coming and what will it mean for them? And also that assessment of business readiness. If you bake all of those together, you essentially end up with your business change and your TOM delivery plan in essence. So this is obviously that middle part in that roadmap. So that's very kind of conceptual. And what I wanted to do next was start to share how I've applied this for a use case. And this is an example from a client that I have worked with at Holly Holland. And we implemented a operating model for a global bank. So just to sort of set the scene a little bit, we were working with a global client, and they had some real challenges, regulatory challenges around the kind of liquidity domain in their organization, and the ability to prove to the regulators that they understood the flow of data within their lineage, within their liquidity domain. So they had a number of challenges there. They had data pertinent to liquidity and their liquidity space in all over their organization, in lots of different spreadsheets, lots of different systems, very siloed. There was lots of data manipulation that's required every time they were, asked by the regulator to validate that they could prove they understood where their data was kind of coming to and from. I say lots of reliance on spreadsheets. And again, because of that, they had a heavy reliance on individuals because they had the know-how on how to manipulate this data, which presented quite a lot of risks to that organization as well. And not only that, but it was really timely to be able to manage that data and present it to the regulator each time that was requested. So Holly Holland as a consultancy came in to help that client implement essentially run a proof of value for a data lineage tool. And essentially what that data lineage tool is kind of pulled in the information around data that was used within that liquidity domain, and then started to link it and understand how that flow of data, moved within that organization. But supplementary to that, we also designed a target operating model blueprint, and this is the piece of work that I got involved with. So as you can see, there's sort of the technical piece, which is the tooling, but then the op model piece was complementary to that. In terms of the project itself and who was sort of sponsoring it and the end users of that, it was their central core sort of data governance team that was sponsoring this project, but ultimately it was the corporate treasury team that were the end users of that. So you've got sort of two parties with a significant kind of part to play in that. So just very quickly, I've sort of explained lineage at a very high level, but essentially, data lineage is that ability to track the flow of data from source to target and understanding where data originates, where it ends, but also how it changed. It may be manipulated in the middle. We may, change that data in some way. So essentially that's sort of the context of the piece of work and what the tool was helping us to achieve. It's that data passes from here to here to here, and it changes at some stage in the middle. And the tooling itself, this is just a screenshot just to kind of bring to life what the technology looked like. And you can see in here we've got sort of source file, staging, data lake. So source file is our source, data lake is the target, the staging is sort of the middle ground where the data is sort of feeding, and you see the arrows indicating the pass of that data from one system to another. And this really helps sort of get all of that data and all these different data sources into one place. It enabled them to be able to trace, say, for example, if they want to say, tell us where family name originates from in your systems, we could use this to help us do that. And so this is the tool itself. But actually, when it came to defining our TOM blueprint, the what, we actually used that lineage tool to be able to do this. So here is just a screenshot of the operating model as we initially started to sketch that out when we were in that blueprint stage. And in here, we've got things like business architecture, application, production support, model management. So each of those models, each of those maps, I suppose, in that tool is a model. So we need to understand, how do we manage those? How do we kind of build new models? How do we maintain them? How do we retire them? That was all part and parcel of our operating model. The component areas that are in kind of a yellowy colour, that's what we called out for our level 1. That's what we went and got endorsement for and said, right, these are the areas of the op model that we think are relevant and important. And then when we got that kind of thumbs up and that endorsement, we then went around the loop and we started to build that out. And you'll see on the left-hand side, there's lots of little drop-down twizzle arrows. There's lots of detail that's kind of baked into this. So it starts to dive into quite a lot of detail. So we just chose to represent our operating model, our target operating model blueprint in this format, but it didn't need to be. So it could have been in PowerPoint, it could have been in Excel, it could have been more visual. Again, I sort of said, how you present it, it very much comes down to the organisation and how the organisation likes to see information presented. So there's always a kind of a preference, I suppose, in terms of how you choose to show your information. So that's sort of the what are the component parts, and then we moved on to build out an operating model RACI. So this is around the who. So this is where it got quite interesting, and lots of kind of discussions with the business around, okay, so these are the things that we think are important in our operating models. So we need to, who's going to sort of maintain the server from a technical point of view? Who's going to be accountable for that? Who's going to be responsible? Actually, you need to be informed whenever we're doing that. And this was quite a big piece of work. And this is just a kind of snapshot, but it was we built this out to quite a low level of detail. And it was really great because it really got those conversations out on the table around, okay, we need some accountability for all of these elements of our operating model. Who's going to do that? And we essentially captured this. We got sign off of it. So along the top here, you'll see the business functions. So on the business roles, so you've got your production services, you've got your data governance team, the business, and it just starts to really bring to life. But also you're kind of eyeballing, the business as to who's going to do this, and getting that discussion out there and kind of reaching some degree of consensus. So that's the who. And then this is sort of a summary of the what. These are the artifacts and the activities that we conducted as part of the operating model. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you'll see kind of it covers off the trainings, the processes, our metrics for measuring our success, and so forth. So this is what we were implementing as part of that delivery plan. This is what we baked in there, and we were implementing and sharing with the organisation. But all of this is great. But what's so important is how you share, how you publish this. It's all very well putting all the thought into it and getting your sponsor to sign it off, but ultimately this is going to impact many parts of your business. So how you share that needs to be really, really well thought through. And for us, we used kind of we agreed with the organisation we're working with, what was the best approach for them and their organisation. So we kept all of our documents, all of the best practice guidelines, all the processes. We had a master repository in SharePoint. That's where everything was mastered and that's where everything got signed off. But we also wanted something that was like a shop window, the kind of go-to, the pretty front end where people could go and go, oh, I want to find out a bit more about what this tool does for our organization and how I use it and how do I get trained on it and how do I raise a problem if there's an issue with it. And that was where our kind of we called it an information hub in Confluence. We published that. I would like to share that with you, but I've had to restrict that for obviously confidentiality point of view. But you get the idea. It's that pretty front end that then hyperlinks out to the SharePoint repository at the back end. But not only that, the data lineage, data transparency operating model was just one part of an actual wider operating model around their enterprise data governance. So actually we had to incorporate some of our information and link to it out into another kind of Confluence repository. So we kind of listened to our client in terms of what was the best approach for that particular organization, how do we share that? And that's obviously supplemented and complemented with communications, lunch and learns, and those other kind of ways in which you can sort of share and articulate. So time for reflection. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I do need to kind of move through, but there are lots of challenges. There always are. Project work is never straightforward. We always, have problems with people's availability and getting sign off, but two things in particular I want to call out. So stakeholder understanding of the operating model was really kind of important. So I'm sort of going through working and defining what this target operating model is going to look like and how we're going to implement that. And I'd have many, many conversations with my sponsor and my product owner. And there were a few occasions where I just got the feeling that the way I envisage it, they hadn't quite landed with them. They hadn't quite understood. They were nodding, but wasn't convinced that they really fully understood it. So, as a BA, I think we have great skills to be able to read into people's behaviors, body language, perhaps, and kind of get that gut feeling that maybe we haven't quite landed that correctly. So there were a few occasions where I'd actually go back and revisit and maybe explain it in a slightly different way and just get that absolute clarity and certainty they understood that, because at the end of the day, it's their operating model and they're going to be endorsing it. And if they don't understand it themselves, then, you're not exactly setting yourself up for success. The other point in here is around making the model workable. And this is really important. I showed that RACI matrix, and that took quite a lot of time of going backwards and forwards. And, we think that team should be accountable. And then the next time you look at it, oh no, I think that team should be accountable. Quite a lot of backwards and forwards. But part of the design of that, part of where we saw those roles and responsibilities fitting in, we came to realize that actually the way we'd envisaged it would work wasn't practically going to land. We'd got a dependency on a particular team. They were going to be accountable and responsible for some of those activities in there. And I designed those processes so that we had a degree of control and governance within there. And immediately, well, not immediately, actually, kind of quite subtly, it became to light that actually that team that we said were accountable and responsible were really under-resourced. They were never going to be able to be responsible and accountable. They were never going to have the capacity to do that. And so we re-engineered some of those processes and some of those, some of those processes essentially, because we knew that actually it was never going to land. It was never going to be successful. So there's a bit of negotiation either way. I wanted to keep the intent of what I was trying to design in there, whilst also making sure that it worked for that organization. And again, if you don't think it's going to work for the organization, you're just setting yourself up for failure, essentially. And then we achieve success? We did. We got through an internal audit. Our op model was scrutinized with a fine-tooth comb, and it got through. So that was kind of the obvious success. The reasons, a lot of the reason behind the success was that we had really, really close collaboration with our product owner. We very much worked through this together. And as I say, it was their op model at the end of the day. I was the coordinating, pulling it together and putting some thinking out there that could help them move that forward. And that was really, really useful. They helped socialize it. They helped endorse it. At the end of the day, they brought this product into the business. They wanted it to be a success. It was in their interest to really help support that and move it forward. But, I've called out there, strong stakeholder management. We had to manage them. quite strongly in occasions. We had to have some quite awkward conversations around the way that the direction that they saw it going, we didn't see was really going to work, and kind of had to really kind of get that on the table and have those awkward conversations and try and meet some sort of middle ground. Would I do anything differently? Yes, of course. I mean, you'd always do something differently. I think for me, socializing the op model earlier would have been, really great, and it's something I'd take forward going forwards. But also, kind of complementary to that, socializing it a bit more wider through some broader comms channels. I think that would have been really beneficial. We were trying to launch a kind of Teams channel that would be a kind of a route to kind of communicate out kind of key messages, and we never managed to get that off the ground, and that was largely because of other business priorities. We had to sort of, we are one of many pieces of work that were going on within that organization. We had to sort of, stay cognizant of that, I suppose. So just to wrap it up, in terms of takeaways, I'm hoping that I've kept to my word, and what I said you get at the beginning, you get to take away. But for me, operating models really can help maximize the value of change. So putting that time and effort into designing it really will pay off. I think it's, it should go hand in hand with any sort of kind of more technical delivery. The operating model piece should really kind of go hand in hand with that. In terms of how you capture operating model, there's no hard and fast rules. The remit of the change will be different. It will be different for different organizations in terms of what works for them. You just have to listen to that organization and think about what's going to land best, really. Make it visual, keep it interesting, and actually it gives us the opportunity to be quite creative. Try and, keep this interesting, because people are going to be more engaged with it. Share the design. I've already talked about this, share the design as you go. The more you share, the greater the endorsement, and then more likely your operating model is going to be a success. Prioritize what's important and what will give the most value. So I talked about MVP, right? Yeah, some things you need to have in place because you can't get to day one without them. Other things will be nice to haves, and actually some of those nice to haves bring you more value than others. So think about the things that are going to bring you the most value. You aren't necessarily going to be able to do everything, and actually that's what you can refine over time, essentially. Once you've finished it, obviously share it. You can never overshare. People need to understand it. And then finally, hopefully you'll see, that as business analysts, we've got a really great skill set that can lend themselves to this type of work. Yes, it might sit a little bit outside of the conventional BA remit, but actually we've got all the skills that really lend themselves to them excellently. So on that note, I'm going to stop. This is my summary. Hopefully everyone's got something to take away from that. Thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Well, Caroline, I can tell you that there's really lots of praise in the chat, including Rushma saying it's the best webinar she's attended. And I can tell you, Rushma's attended a lot of these webinars, so that is high praise indeed. You have crammed so much insight into this webinar. Thank you so much, Caroline. And I'm I'm amazed at how much practical, actionable stuff you've been able to convey in just an hour. Unfortunately, we're out of time in terms of questions, which I did say in the opening might be the case, because I know, Caroline, you had so much to generously give to us. Are you okay if people have questions? Are you okay if they connect with you on LinkedIn and ask the questions outside of the webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to. Yeah, absolutely. I know it sparked a bit of interest last time I ran this, so yeah, I'm more than happy to.
Fantastic. And what I'll do as well, Caroline, is I will ping you across just all of the questions that have been asked in case you get inspired to write an article or put something on LinkedIn about it as well. So then you can see what's done. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. I mean, my head's buzzing with ideas about what you've presented today. I'm sure that looking at the chat that everyone's mind is buzzing as well. Just before those of you that are here live, just before you go, I've got just a few community announcements to mention. First of all, I know I've posted the LinkedIn addresses in the chat. I will do this again, just so do connect with Caroline. if this was a real world presentation, you'd be giving a round of applause now. I always think a virtual round of applause, one way of doing that is by connecting with the speaker and getting in touch and saying that you like what they've had to say. Believe
Yeah,
me, that really does make a difference.
thank
And I can
you.
see all the virtual emojis coming now, which is awesome.
I'm going to do one final plug, if you don't mind, Adrian. So,
Yeah,
as I
please.
said at the beginning, I ran this as a 1 hour presentation at the IRM BA conference in September. I'm actually taking this back, but running it as a workshop this September. So, if any of you are interested in coming to that, it's a fantastic conference anyway. But this will be run as a half day. Some of the content will be familiar if you've joined today and you do come to that, but it'll be more of a practical hands-on application. So just a quick plug there.
Fantastic. And I am just going to put the link in the chat. So I've put a link to that conference in the chat. So if you're interested, the BA Conference Europe, well worth attending for Caroline's session and many other interesting sessions alongside that. I'm also just going to mention our next upcoming BA community events. We have a webinar so there's nothing in May, just because May seems to be an incredibly hectic, relentlessly hectic month. However, in June, we have a webinar on the Jobs to be Done framework with Alex Cottrell. So do check that out as well. And then in July, there is a more of an interactive workshop, a 1 hour workshop with Jamie Champagne, all the way from Hawaii. On hybrid facilitation. So the links are there. If you opted in when you registered for the webinar, you'll automatically get sent a copy of the recording, likely the end of next week, end of this week, beginning of next week. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Caroline, for taking time out, and thanks everyone for attending. And there's been really active chat, so thank you all for being active on the chat as well. So take care, everyone, and see you again
Thank you.
soon. Bye
Thanks,
for now.
Adrian. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
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 Bye.